developing the habit of reflecting a little bit on meditation when the meditation ends. I invite you to do the same, to just think about what just happened as you set the intention to be friendly towards your own pain and the pain of others, to care, to empathize, without judging or trying to too deeply analyze ourselves of where we're at, but just a simple non-judgmental acknowledgement of like, oh yeah, some ability to do this, not much ability yet, made some progress, still working on it. The heart practices, the compassion practices like compassion. I don't think this is a traditional, maybe it is. I don't know if it's traditional Buddhist thing to think, way to think about it or not, but I've heard many teachers talk about the difference between a dry or a wet practice. That sometimes you're trying to develop compassion and it feels very dry. Like it's just words, it's just intentions, it's just this very dry aspiration, just saying over and over in your mind, may all beings be free from suffering, not really meaning it yet, not really feeling much about it, but still doing the practice. And then that sometimes it actually feels very moving, feels very wet, like maybe emotional, like there's a feeling behind, feeling of compassion, feeling of empathy, and even of feeling some pain for how much suffering there is in our own lives and in this world. I'm actually allowing ourselves to feel it. Actually, the word karuna that we translate as compassion has a literal translation of something like that, something like the heart being moved, quivering in response to pain. That there's an internal experience of feeling it, and that there's something that feels moved. It's not numb, it's not dry, it's not, you know what I mean? You know that feeling. And it actually is not very pleasant usually. Sometimes compassion, in my experience, feels soothing, and sometimes it feels heavy, like unpleasant to feel someone else's pain, or to really be present for our own pain. So whether your experience is dry or wet, somewhere in between, slightly moist. Just acknowledge that this is where I am today, and it changes all the time. And gradually, I really like to think of it as a skill that we develop, and quite a radical skill. I know my own history was that I saw of the ignorance and oppression and suffering in the world, and thought that I needed to stay angry about it in order to be effective. That anger was the most effective, hating it, hating the ignorance, hating the pain in this world and the confusion. I felt like I needed to hold on to the hatred. And so some of these Buddhist concepts felt confusing. And how, I think one of the questions that I had, and that maybe some of you have, is how are we going to create a positive change on this planet if we're not pissed off? about all of the oppression, about all of the ignorance? Are we going to still be effective if we're just nice and compassionate? And, this was one of the, as I said earlier, one of the reasons why the Buddha said this teaching is really radical, because as it turns out, and has been my experience, actually being angry is easy, is natural. It's easy to be pissed off. And that actually anger contracts us on a lot of levels and makes us less engaged, less active, less effective. And that compassion actually opens us up to a much more engaged, active, responsive attitude and way of being. And that compassion is much more radical than hatred. The most ignorant and confused people on this planet are really good at hatred. It's really good. It comes natural to them. To develop the wisdom of compassion is a lifelong pursuit. And you see someone like, I don't know if it's a good example or not, but I always think of the Dalai Lama. And one time he was asked something about his development of compassion, because he seems like such a compassionate guy and he's been through some shit. And he said, well, I've made progress over the decades. He said, I didn't really start practicing until I was about 6 years old. And then between 6 and 16, I saw some progress. I was doing all of these compassion practices, and I saw about 10 years, I started to have a little bit more compassion. And then between 16 and 26, I saw, I'm becoming a little bit more compassionate, less aversive, more open. These practices that I'm doing every day are working. And then 26 to 36, and 36 to 46, and 46 to 56. And I think he was maybe 76 or something when he said this, late 60s or 70s. He's like, I'm decades in, and I've developed a lot of compassion because I've trained my mind and heart through these Buddhist practices. But without this, I'm not just a compassionate person. Without these practices, I wouldn't be compassionate. These are skills that have been developed over the decades of meditation. I don't know why I'm on a Tibetan kick, but for some reason I am. And one of the great Tibetan sages, I don't even know who it is. It's either Milarepa or Nagarjuna or one of these. I forget who it was. Anyways, one of these guys, one of the Tibetan homies who lived in a cave and did all of this meditation practice. At some point, some students came to him and they said, how have you developed all of this compassion? And he pulled up his robes and showed them his naked ass, covered in what are they? Calluses. Covered in calluses. And he said, from sitting on my ass on this painful cave that I'm living in, and learning to be uncomfortable, and to the point where my ass is calloused from all of the hours of sitting here developing compassion, the years and decades. And I just feel like this is an important model for us, because I think it's quite easy for us to think like, oh, you're either compassionate or you're not. And I would land towards actually nobody is really deeply compassionate without long-term training. It is counter to our own instinctual drives to be deeply compassionate towards our own pain as well as the pains of others. And so we do. We come here and we meditate. on our nice cushy chairs and pillow top meditation cushions, minimize the discomfort as much as possible. But there's still plenty of discomfort to deal with. So some of my thoughts about compassion. What's your experience with it? What are your comments, questions? Sure.
I mentioned before my challenge of being friendly and compassionate to pain, because when I think of pain, there's physical pain and there's emotional pain.
Mm-hmm.
And emotional pain for me is usually like anxiety or shame, self-judgment, right? And I think about when you talk about it along those lines, you also say acceptance in the same group of like what our goal is. And I think about how can I be friendly, a mental structure. What would I say to my shame? I look at it. Oh, I love you, Shane. And how are you doing today, Shane? But what really works for me is when I think about acceptance, and I would say radical acceptance, because these are parts of me. And even though the teachings are no self, most of us carry with us a sense of a self. And I know I've carried these affects with me for many years.
Yeah. And
they're troubling affects, right? So while you were teaching that, I was thinking, for me, what would really work would be like a radical acceptance, but not just from idea, but in my heart and in my body. Like I accept this part of me deeply, not trying to push it away. Like I can own my fears. It's me. And in doing that, I would be accepting myself.
I love it. And actually, it feels like you had a pretty big breakthrough.
Oh, okay, thank you.
We've been having this conversation for years, you and I. And, there's a shift. Something shifted. And sometimes it's semantics of like, okay, don't think about compassion. Think about radical self-acceptance, which is what a compassionate thing to do for yourself. Not getting rid of the shame or, those patterns. But what a compassionate response, accepting yourself just as you are, rather than hating it, judging it, making it worse. It's absolutely what we're doing. And so sometimes we just have to think about it, reframe it a little bit. And you did that in your practice tonight. And I'm happy for you. Yeah.
I find at the edge of a longer sit, I really come face to face with impatience as like the flavor of suffering, or expectation sometimes. And so for me, those are kind of interesting things to try and say yes to, instead of like, because they're so about getting to the end of something, and sitting is like this really, really acute form of it, but I really experience it in the rest of my life a lot, trying to get through this patch so I can get on the other side and then it'll be better. And so I find the sitting compassion for impatience it's really available because there's plenty of it to work with. So.
Yeah. Makes sense. Anybody that's done a lot of meditation, I think, has the experience sometimes of getting pissed off at the meditation leader, the teacher. You're like, when are you going to ring the fucking bell? Like your mind just does that. Just like, come on, enough already. I'm pretty sure he fell asleep. Like, having fantasies of like taking a tennis ball and like throwing it at the bell. It's like, I'll end this shit. Nobody will know. Everybody's eyes are closed. Pretty sure I could ring the bell from here. And that experience of impatience, I think, is so, it's aversion and it's so common and it's just part of our practice for sure. And calling for some compassion and not taking it so personal when the mind starts complaining. Like, oh, ringing the bell thought again. Big surprise. When is it going to be fucking over? But, just like, having some sense of humor. So if you can, in your practice, have a sense of lightness and the kind of ludicrousness of what your mind does, and some sense of humor about, like, we get so caught up in our thoughts and our, experience. And it's more mindfulness than the compassion, but there's that perspective where you can kind of step back and just be like, look at what my mind is doing now. Check out this show. Please.
About a week or so ago, you spoke about forgiveness, and you did this really amazing meditation around that. And so I used part of what you did for the compassion meditation, and it really works a lot, because I start with myself, and kind of that forgiving or the compassion, towards self. And then you have those three groups, right? So the first group, the people who are easy to show compassion towards, or easy to forgive. And then the second group, the ones that are like, you're not there yet. You might get there, you might not. And then the last group is, the hardest group.
Yeah.
The people who you just, it's almost impossible to forgive or show compassion towards. So I just really wanted to acknowledge and thank you so much, because I'm starting to do that kind of with everything. And if I start with self, it almost levels the playing field, and then your heart opens up. So
yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I have that experience sometimes in this radiating, where you're like, you're thinking about the whole world, and you're like, yeah, everybody except for not those fuckers over there, but everybody else, compassion, but where the mind is just like, no, not them. And then sometimes, not this part of myself, maybe even part of what Alan was talking about before. It's like, I can be accepting of my impatience, but not my shame. Fuck my shame, like where we compartmentalize. And I think it is skillful to say, like, yes, there's the easy ones, and then there's the more difficult, and then there's the ones that it just feels like I don't have access of compassion or forgiveness yet. And that just having the humility to be like, I'm not there yet for this part of myself, or for this group of ignorant beings, or whatever it is, and letting it be okay, not turning our Buddhist practice, our spiritual practice, into another way that we judge ourselves, of like, I can't have compassion for everybody, I'm a failed Buddhist. That we're developing that. And that's why I was saying, like, the Dalai Lama over decades, or, whoever that Tibetan was that I'm referring to, like, calluses on his ass from practicing so long to develop that. All beings, takes a while. Please, Ron.
So the prerequisite of being compassionate has to be pure motive.
Positive motive. I don't know if it has to be. Yeah, sure. I don't know if it's. I would get stuck a little bit on pure.
In other words, what I'm saying, you genuinely want to contribute for someone's happiness without wanting anything back.
Yeah, it is selfless.
Yeah.
Real compassion is selfless. And that was the difference, what that teacher was saying, the difference between real compassion and idiot compassion, where there's like, you're doing it so that you're not uncomfortable, or you're doing it, yeah.
So I have to give you a small story on acknowledging Alan last week. Can I please?
Sure.
After we left here, we went to Coffee Bean for tea. And this woman came out and a few drinks and couldn't find her car. So Alan took his time to find her a car, but she was so drunk, I don't think he would allow her to drive. So he said, I gotta call somebody in the family to pick you up. So he called his daughter. It took half an hour, and he took her keys and gave it to this bar to hold them responsible not to give her the keys. So I asked Anna, why did you do this? It came from his heart. It could be my sister or my mother. What a gift that was.
For me. Thank you. Thankful for the grace of God that alive.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I like that what we're doing isn't just it becomes action. How do we then bring this into the world in our interactions, in our situational, like, oh, here's an opportunity. Amanda, please.
So I feel like usually most of the time when I sit, I can track with your words. And the last few weeks I've been sort of heartbroken. And so I've been finding that I'm like sub words and I can't connect the practice in that intellectual way that I usually do that is pretty fruitful. Mm-hmm. And it's like an exploration and I'm familiar with that way of sitting, but this heartache or heartbreak is so persistent that every time I get quiet, it's sort of the only thing there. Mm-hmm. And it's been interesting through loving kindness and now compassion, all the different forms you've been teaching over the last few weeks that like tonight I felt like it was compassionate just to sit. And so it was like a very active, saturated, almost one note. I'm just here and it's okay. I'm still here. I'm allowed. But it wasn't conscious. It wasn't intellectual. It was just the being.
Yeah.
So,
sounds perfect. And as I was saying in the beginning, this using the phrases is like it's a commentary practice. The early practice was the Buddha saying, just feel it and radiate the feeling. So you're on the right track. And that sometimes, especially in heartbreak, and all we can do is just sit in it. And that's compassion, sit in it, not always turning the TV on to avoid it or drinking or doing something else. Just sitting in it and being like, okay, I got to let this come through. Please.
Last week you did something else with we were breathing in and breathing out and breathing in with pain and breathing out. Mm-hmm. And the way that you were saying it was a little complicated for me to grasp onto.
Yeah.
So I simplified it down and basically the entire time this is all I did, which was holding on, letting go, holding on, letting go. So breathing in, holding on, and letting just those words. Getting into the feeling of it, of what holding on to is like and how shitty it is. And then the feeling of letting it go and how beautiful that was. And I just did that the entire time. And I've been able to use that because it's so simple. Holding on in, letting go out. I'm able to incorporate that in everything.
Great. Great. And I love it. Like I'm a huge fan of making these practices your own. Like not trying to need to be a traditional technique, but make it your own and then trust your own direct experience. Like this is benefiting me. And, so I love that, the creative way that you reframe the practice. George.
I ask you this every time you teach this class, but where does compassion come from? Like you talked about it's learned. Like where do we
Cover a different perspective. Alan, you say your name.
I have a very close friend who's died.
Yeah.
And he had lung cancer, which metastasized to the brain.
Yeah.
And I just found out that he's having seizures now. Which means that his life is entirely different. Hasn't always been accompanied by somebody who can't provide stuff. And all I could think when I heard this was to tell him, I'll be with you as much as you will allow me to be. And wouldn't tell me what I could do to be useful. Which takes me to the question I asked you earlier about arrogance. And I was in meditation tonight, I was reflecting on that question.
Yeah.
And it occurs to me that when compassion is an experience toward the other, and if your expression of my expression of compassion is in order to relieve my own uncomfort, it's not compassion. If my expression of compassion is to maintain a power position, it's not compassion. And if it's truly to give to the other person, so for me, compassion is a giving. Does that make any sense?
It does. I like it. It does make sense. The only question I have is that you're also worthy of your own compassion. So yes, it's giving to others, but also giving the appropriate, and it gets tricky because sometimes actually my needs and what's appropriate for me is not what's appropriate for you. And so then it can feel like it's selfish if I'm putting that on you somehow. But I don't know that
it's selfish. I think it's just a judgment call.
Yeah.
It's a priority issue. But as long as your compassion toward one's compassion toward oneself, there is that dichotomy between the one and the oneself.
Yeah.
The same way there's a dichotomy between me and you.
Yeah.
But we're all somehow the same anyway. So
Connected.
it's a weird mix.
Yeah, I feel like compassion, there's that Western, like compassion means putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Maybe that's empathy, and I like that, but we also have to put ourselves in our own shoes, right? Like, and compassion for our own pain is so important. So it's not always just about others. Because that's one of the things that guy was talking about, idiot compassion, where you're just so busy caring about everyone else and you're not taking care of yourself.
But I think my own pain is the other.
Yeah.
I think there's me and then there's my pain. And they're not identical.
Mm.
So it's me that has the facility, hopefully, to extend myself to my pain.
I like that. That's that kind of Buddha nature responding. I like that. Last question in the back, if you still have it.
Really
Comment, yeah.
It's a comment. So when we did the forgiveness, of course, I thought I was great, magnanimous, compassionate human being. I had done so well. I was raised by a very compassionate woman. She was just naturally like that. I mean, I didn't let her say that. And a lot of the times I feel that I have her nature. I have her. But as soon as I started doing forgiveness, someone calls me, reminds me of something that happened 20 years ago, and I'm in the house like, going out, and I'm like, okay, because, sit down, what's going on here, trying to be compassionate, and it's just ongoing, like you said, excavation. So,
yeah.
But of course, as soon as you feel like you've gotten to a certain point, they're like, hey, what about this? You got this.
Yeah, so we forget impermanence. We think and I think I talked about that in the forgiveness. I thought I'd forgiven everybody and I'm done.
Right.
It's like, I was just done for that one moment of forgiveness. And then a lot of that shit came back and I got to forgive over and over and over. Lots of opportunities. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Enough for tonight. Thank you for your participation and consideration of this very important practice, experience, topic. Class is done by donation. Please be generous. Chris will be at the desk. There's a bowl there. We ask for a $15 to $20 donation if you can afford it. And know that you're always welcome here, even if you can't afford to donate much. Don't worry about the money. Just come practice with us. But if you have it, give it. If you can. And retreat starts next week on Monday, the 28th, a week from today. So I won't be here next week. You will have a special guest. I'm not sure who that's going to be yet, but Bob Dylan. Somebody will be leading class next week. And so we will have class. But I really encourage you all to come on retreat. There's room for you all to come. It's a week of practice. There's some scholarship, partial scholarship money available still, I believe, if you can't afford it. It's in Joshua Tree. It's a 6-night meditation retreat where you get to do this practice all day, every day, for almost a whole week. And it does something incredibly beneficial for our minds and our hearts and the uncovering of these qualities that we seek to uncover. So if you haven't registered yet, you still can, and just, get out of all of your responsibilities and come.
Right.
I don't think I have any other announcements. May any merit that has been developed through our practice be shared outward in all directions with all beings. May each one of us uncover the compassionate heart, develop the wise response of empathy and mercy towards ourselves and others. And together as a community, may we create a positive change on this planet.